The torn wedding dress hung like surrender on Amelia Hart's frame. Red Hollow's train station stretched empty except for dust devils and the woman nobody wanted. Her fingers traced patterns in the dirt, coding her ivory silk words she couldn't speak. Questions she couldn't hear answered. Caleb Morgan saw her through the locomotive's dying steam. 2 years since Sarah died. 730 days since his boys last smiled. Their hollow eyes watched from the wagon bed as he approached the abandoned bride. The station master had tried shouting at her. Not understanding her deafness, the townspeople whispered about curses and shame. But Caleb recognized something familiar in her stillness, the same silence that had swallowed his home. He knelt, drew his stick through the dirt teacher needed. Her eyes met his gray as winter storms, fierce as survival itself. When she nodded, something shifted in the desert air. Hope, perhaps, or just the first word in a new language of salvation. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Edgar Mills lifted Amelia's carpet bag with surprising gentleness, his weathered hands careful with her meager possessions. "Don't weigh much for a whole life," he muttered to Caleb, then leaned closer, tobacco breath sharp in the cooling air. "Watch yourself with Silas Boone. That Mormon's been eyeing your water rights since Sarah passed. Now you're bringing home a strange woman." He glanced at Amelia, who stood perfectly still beside the wagon, her torn dress rustling in the evening wind. "Just watch yourself," Caleb nodded, helping Amelia onto the buckboard's hard bench. The boys Eli and Jonah pressed themselves against the wagon's far side, studying her with the wariness of spooked colts. Their mother's absence had carved hollows beneath their eyes, turned them into ghosts of the laughing children they'd been. As the wagon rolled away from Red Hollow, Caleb pulled a pencil stub and paper from his vest. In the dying light, he wrote, "My wife died 2 years ago. Consumption. The boys haven't spoken since." Amelia read, then took the pencil. Her handwriting flowed elegant despite the wagon's jolting. "I understand silence. Mine was born with me. Theirs was born from loss. Perhaps we can meet somewhere between." The 20-mile journey stretched ahead through sage and shadow. Eli, the older boy at 12, kept stealing glances at Amelia's hands as she gazed at the emerging stars. Her fingers moved in graceful patterns, as if pulling invisible threads from the darkening sky. Without thinking, she was signing her thoughts, a private conversation with the universe that the boys had never seen before. "What's she doing?" Jonah whispered to his brother. The first words Caleb had heard from him in months. "Don't know," Eli whispered back, but his eyes tracked every movement. 10 miles out, they stopped at Willow Spring to rest the horses. Caleb built a small fire while Amelia unpacked the blue enamel coffee pot from the supply box. The boys maintained their distance until she looked directly at them, pointed at the Big Dipper overhead, then made a simple gesture, her index finger pointing upward, tracing a small circle. She wrote in the dirt, "Star." Jonah's eyes widened. He copied the movement, finger pointing up. Amelia smiled, the first real smile any of them had seen from her. She nodded encouragement, and Jonah repeated the sign, this time with confidence. The night grew cold as they continued toward Morgan Creek Ranch. Desert cold, the kind that crept through wool and cotton alike. Amelia pulled her thin shawl tighter, trying not to shiver. The boys whispered together in the wagon bed, and then Jonah crept forward, dragging something heavy. It was a quilt, wedding ring pattern in blue and cream. Sarah Morgan's handiwork. Caleb recognized with a sharp pang. The boy held it out to Amelia, not meeting her eyes, then scrambled back to his brother before she could respond. She spread the quilt over her lap, running her fingers across the precise stitching. When she looked back at the boys, her eyes glistened with tears she wouldn't let fall. She pressed her hand to her heart, then extended it toward them, a gesture that needed no translation. The moon had risen full by the time Morgan Creek Ranch appeared. 2 stories of log and limestone emerged from the darkness like a ship run aground in the desert. Attached to one side stood a smaller building with windows along its length, the schoolhouse Caleb had built for Sarah's dream of teaching neighboring children. It had stood empty since her death, a monument to interrupted plans. "Home," Caleb said aloud, forgetting Amelia couldn't hear. But she understood anyway, seeing how his shoulders straightened, how the boys suddenly sat taller despite their exhaustion. As they pulled up to the main house, kerosene lanterns swinging from the wagon hooks cast wild shadows across the yard. A swing hung motionless from the oak tree Sarah had insisted on watering through 3 summers of drought until it took hold. Everything waited in stillness, as if the ranch itself had been holding its breath for 2 years. Amelia climbed down from the wagon, her movements stiff from the long ride. She stood in the yard, taking in the house, the schoolroom, the vast darkness of land stretching toward mountains. Then she turned to Caleb and the boys, who watched her with expressions caught between hope and fear. She walked to the schoolhouse door, tried the handle. It opened with a creak of disuse. Through the doorway, moonlight illuminated rows of empty benches, slate boards on the walls, everything coated in dust but waiting for voices to fill it again, or perhaps for hands to speak what voices couldn't say. Amelia stepped back, faced the family, and signed something complex and beautiful, a flowing series of gestures that painted pictures in the air. The boys didn't understand the words, but they felt the meaning. "We will learn together." Jonah tugged his father's sleeve. "Pa," he whispered, "can she teach us that the hand talking?" Caleb looked down at his younger son, heard the curiosity breaking through grief's wall. "I expect she can, son. I expect that's exactly what she's here to do." As they entered the house, Amelia carrying Sarah's quilt like a bridge between past and future, none of them noticed the rider on the distant ridge. Silas Boone sat his horse in darkness, watching the new arrival with calculating eyes. Change had come to Morgan Creek Ranch, and change threatened everything he'd been planning. But inside the house, something else was beginning. As Caleb lit the lamps and Amelia helped the boys carry her single bag to the small room off the kitchen, the silence that filled the space felt different. Not empty anymore, but full of possibility, like a held breath before the first word of a new language. Morning came harsh through the windows, revealing what darkness had hidden. Dust sheets draped the schoolroom furniture like shrouds, each bench and desk waiting beneath white cotton that had yellowed with time. Amelia pulled back the coverings methodically, releasing clouds that danced in the sunbeams. McGuffey readers stood in perfect rows on the shelves, their spines uncracked since Sarah Morgan's hands had placed them there. Slate boards hung on every wall, some still bearing the ghost marks of old lessons' arithmetic problems half erased. The alphabet in careful cursive that had faded but not disappeared. Caleb stood in the doorway, watching. "Sarah ordered these from Chicago," he said, forgetting again that Amelia couldn't hear, but she understood something in his posture, the way his hand gripped the door frame. She nodded, continuing her exploration with respectful hands. The boys crept in behind their father. Jonah immediately went to a low shelf where carved wooden animals sat in a row. A horse, a cow, a dog, each worn smooth from handling. He picked up the horse, then quickly set it down as if it had burned him. "I made those," Caleb said to the air. "Before." Amelia found the slate pencils in their box, tested one on a board. The screech made the boys flinch, but she drew anyway a simple house. Stick figures of different heights, the sun above. Then she pointed to each figure, looked at each person in the room, and waited. Eli understood first. He pointed to the tallest figure, then to his father. Amelia smiled, wrote Caleb beneath it. She continued with each figure until the family stood mapped on the slate, their first lesson already begun. Back in the main house, the parlor held its own ghosts. Sarah's daguerreotype presided from the mantel, her serious face frozen in sepia permanence. The boys wouldn't look at it, keeping their eyes fixed on the floor whenever they passed. A Montgomery Ward catalog lay open on the side table to a page of women's boots. The corner turned down as if Sarah might return to place her order. The cast iron stove squatted cold in the corner, its belly empty of the warmth it once provided. Amelia walked through the room slowly, taking inventory. In the kitchen, she found the household running with the mechanical precision of people avoiding feeling. everything in its place. Nothing touched that didn't need touching. Tallow candles stood in holders, their wicks trimmed but unlit. Borax soap sat beside the wash basin, barely used. The house functioned but didn't live. She pulled paper from her small supply, wrote quickly, "I need a bell for attention. Lamp signals for distance. We must be able to call each other." Caleb read, nodded, and disappeared to the barn. He returned with a dinner bell, the kind used to call field hands, and hung it on a post near the kitchen door. "Ring once for meals, twice for emergency, 3 times for gathering," he explained in writing. The noon meal revealed the depth of their isolation. Salt pork and beans, served on tin plates, eaten with the mechanical motions of people who had forgotten food could bring pleasure. The only sounds were forks against metal, the occasional scrape of a moved chair. Even their chewing seemed careful, as if too much noise might shatter something fragile. Amelia set down her fork deliberately, catching everyone's attention. She pointed to herself, then made a flowing gesture with both hands, starting at her chest and moving outward. She repeated it, then wrote, "My name in sign, Amy Lee A." She repeated the gesture, breaking it into parts, showing how each movement corresponded to letters, but also how together they created something unique, her name sign, derived from the sign for grace, combined with welcome. Jonah tried first, his small hands clumsy but eager. Eli watched, pretending disinterest while memorizing every motion. When Jonah finally managed a recognizable version, Amelia clapped silently, her hands meeting but making no sound, teaching them that even applause could exist in their quiet world. She pointed to Caleb next, studied him, then showed him his name sign, a strong downward motion with the right hand. Like driving a fence post, the sign for foundation modified to mean him specifically. He practiced until his weathered hands moved with surprising grace. For Eli, she combined the signs for first and protect, the older brother, the guardian. His eyes widened with recognition of how she saw him. He practiced the sign over and over, as if trying to live up to its meaning. Jonah received the sign for youngest, merged with joy, a reminder of what he had been and could be again. The boy's face crumpled slightly, but he learned it, his hands holding the possibility of happiness, even if his heart couldn't yet. As afternoon waned, Amelia set up the classroom properly. She created sections on different slate boards, one for the alphabet, one for numbers, one for common words. From her carpet bag, she pulled a precious book, The American School for the Deaf Manual, its pages worn from her own education. She showed them pictures of hands forming words, concepts, emotions. Eli stood before the board showing emotions. His finger hesitated over different images. Sad, angry, afraid. Finally, he pointed to one sign, then pressed his fist against his chest, twisting it slowly. "Hurt," Amelia wrote beneath his hand. The word hung in the air like dust motes, visible now that someone had named it. Eli's eyes filled with tears he wouldn't let fall. He made the sign again, pressing harder against his chest, and Caleb moved toward his son, pulled him against his side. Jonah joined them, and for a moment they stood together, held by the acknowledgement of their shared pain. That evening, after a supper slightly less silent than lunch, Jonah had signed good when tasting the cornbread Amelia had made. Caleb sat at his desk with his journal. The boys were in bed, or at least in their room. Amelia sat by the window, mending the tear in her wedding dress by lamplight, transforming it into something new. He wrote carefully, his hand unused to expressing feeling. March 15th, 1882. The teacher has been here one day. She makes silence seem less empty. The boys are learning to speak with their hands what their voices cannot say. Eli signed hurt today. It is the first time any of us has admitted to the pain. Perhaps healing begins with naming what is broken. He looked up to find Amelia watching him. She couldn't hear the scratch of his pen, but she understood the act of recording, of witnessing. She made a sign he didn't recognize, yet both hands over her heart, then extended toward him and toward the rooms where the boys slept. Later, he would learn it meant family. As the lamp burned low, throwing long shadows across the walls, something had shifted in the house. The silence remained, but it no longer pressed down like weight. Instead, it had become a canvas, waiting for hands to paint meaning across its surface. Tomorrow, Amelia would teach them more signs for morning, for work, for hope. But tonight, they had learned the most important ones, their names, their pain, and the first tentative movements toward together. The schoolroom stood ready, its slates gleaming faintly in the moonlight through the windows. The McGuffey readers waited on their shelves, though they might not be needed in the traditional way. This education would begin not with words on a page, but with hands in motion, signing a new future from the ashes of the past. On the mantel, Sarah's daguerreotype watched over them all, and for the first time in 2 years, her stern expression seemed to soften, as if she approved of this unexpected answer to the prayer she'd never gotten to finish, that her boys would find their voices again, even if those voices came through their hands. The morning lessons began with rebellion. Eli threw his slate board across the schoolroom, the crack echoing like a gunshot. "It's too hard," he shouted, his voice raw from disuse. "My hands don't work like that." Amelia didn't flinch. She picked up the slate, examined it for damage, then set it gently back in front of him. From her carpet bag, she pulled out a stack of cards she'd spent the night creating, pictures cut from old magazines and newspapers, pasted onto thick paper. Each card showed something from ranch life: a horse, a fence, a well, a sunset. She held up the horse card, then made the sign 2 fingers extended from her forehead like ears, the hand moving forward, simple, visual, logical. Jonah giggled at how much it looked like a horse's head bobbing. Even Eli's scowl softened. Next came the well. Amelia mimed turning a crank, then showed the sign, one hand forming a circle, the other drawing water up through it. The boys understood immediately. This wasn't like learning Latin or Greek from books. This was learning a language that grew from the things they knew. For 2 hours, they worked through the cards. Amelia had drawn pictures of everything that mattered to ranch life: cattle, chickens, the sunrise, rain, though they'd seen precious little of that lately, various tools from the barn. She'd even drawn their daily activities: milking, feeding animals, mending fences. Each picture connected to a sign, and each sign connected to their lived experience. Jonah learned fastest, his young mind eager for this new way of communicating. He signed chicken with such enthusiasm, fingers pecking at his palm, that he knocked over the inkwell. The black liquid spread across the desk like a shadow, and for a moment, everyone froze. In the before times, Sarah would have scolded. In the after times, such accidents had been met with cold silence. But Amelia laughed, a soundless exhalation that shook her shoulders, her eyes crinkling with genuine mirth. She signed something rapid and complex, then wrote on her slate, "The chicken has laid a black egg." Jonah giggled, then laughed outright, a rusty sound like a gate creaking open after years of disuse. Even Eli smiled, helping to mop up the mess with old newspaper. They were so absorbed in the lesson that none of them heard the horse approaching until its shadow fell across the schoolroom window. Silas Boone sat his mount like a man who owned the earth beneath it, his broad-brimmed hat casting his face in shadow despite the morning sun. He dismounted with deliberate slowness, his boots hitting the ground with authority. Caleb met him at the door, body language tight as fence wire. "Boone?" "Morgan." Boone's voice carried the peculiar mixture of friendliness and threat that marked men who used politeness as a weapon. "Heard you had a visitor. Thought I'd come by with some neighborly concern." He pushed past Caleb into the schoolroom, his eyes taking in everything: the picture cards, the slate boards covered with hand diagrams, Amelia in her altered dress teaching the boys. His gaze lingered on her, noting the way she stood, the grace of her movements, the wedding dress remade into something practical but still carrying the ghost of its original purpose. "So this is the deaf woman from the train station," he said loudly, as if volume might pierce her silence. "The one whose bridegroom had the good sense to run." Caleb's hands clenched into fists, but Amelia touched his arm lightly, a gesture so small Boone might have missed it. But it steadied Caleb, reminded him that violence would serve Boone's purposes, not theirs. Boone pulled papers from his coat, official-looking documents with seals and stamps. Actually, Morgan, this is fortunate timing. Been meaning to discuss these water rights with you. Seems there's some confusion about the creek boundaries. My surveyor says your cattle have been drinking from water that belongs to my spread. That creek has been Morgan land for 15 years, Caleb said, voice controlled but tight. Well, these documents suggest otherwise. Boone spread the papers on Amelia's teaching desk, covering her carefully arranged cards. Course, we could settle this friendly-like. You've got more land than you can work alone. Maybe you should consider selling. I'd give you a fair price. He glanced at Amelia again, and his expression shifted to something uglier. After all, a man in your position needs to be careful. Living out here with a woman who ain't your wife, your boys being exposed to damaged goods. People might talk. The silence that followed was different from the house's usual quiet. This was the silence before a thunderstorm, charged and dangerous. Eli and Jonah pressed closer to Amelia, who stood perfectly still, her face composed despite not hearing the words. She could read the threat in Boone's posture, the danger in his presence. Caleb took a step forward, and for a moment, violence seemed inevitable. Then Amelia moved, swift and decisive. She picked up one of her picture cards, a wolf threatening chickens, and held it up for Boone to see. Then she made a sign, her hand forming a claw, moving in a circle around her other hand, which sheltered smaller fingers beneath it. Protection, defense, family. Boone laughed, an ugly sound. She's simple-minded too. This gets better and better. But Caleb understood what Amelia was showing him. This was a predator, circling, looking for weakness. And the response wasn't to bare teeth, but to shelter together, to be smart, to wait. You need to leave, Caleb said quietly. Take your papers. We'll settle this properly. In court if necessary. Court? Boone gathered his documents with theatrical slowness. Yes, I imagine a court would be very interested in your domestic arrangements. A woman of questionable reputation, teaching children with her heathen hand signals. Why, she could be teaching them anything, corrupting them. He tipped his hat mockingly to Amelia. Ma'am, though I doubt you understand me, you should know that this valley ain't kind to folks who don't belong. Your intended bridegroom figured that out. You might want to consider following his example. After Boone left, trailing dust and threats, the schoolroom felt smaller, more fragile. The boys huddled close to their father, the morning's laughter extinguished. But Amelia wasn't defeated. She went to her slate board and wrote in large, clear letters, "He is afraid of us." Caleb read it, frowned. Afraid. She wrote again, afraid of change, afraid of strength, afraid of family that doesn't look like his. That evening, after a subdued dinner where even Jonah didn't sign his appreciation for the food, they gathered in the parlor for their night lesson. Amelia had pushed aside her exhaustion to prepare new materials. On the floor, she'd laid out papers with the alphabet drawn in careful letters, each one paired with its sign. Horn books from the schoolroom, those paddle-shaped primers with the alphabet protected under a thin sheet of horn, lay ready for reference. She started with the basics again, patient as stone. A, the fist with thumb alongside. B, fingers together, thumb across palm, each letter a small sculpture of meaning. Caleb's large hands struggled with the delicate movements, but he persisted, sweat beading his forehead from concentration. The boys worked through the manual alphabet repeatedly, their young fingers more adaptable than their father's. Within an hour, Eli could spell his name smoothly, the letters flowing into each other. Jonah managed John before getting confused, but his face shone with accomplishment. Then came numbers. 1 through 10 were logical, visual fingers extended to count, but Amelia showed them how numbers could combine with other signs to create complex meanings. 5 fingers wiggling meant 5 cattle. 5 fingers, then the sign for day meant 5 days. As they practiced, Caleb noticed Amelia had arranged something else, a chart of feeling words with their signs. Happy hands brushing upward against the chest. Sad hands tracing tears down the face. Angry, the clenched hand pulling away from the face. Love, crossed arms over chest. Hugging oneself. Jonah studied the chart intently. Then, without warning, he combined signs they'd learned that morning with new ones from the evening. His small hands moved carefully. Mother, the thumb of an open hand against the chin. Then he pointed upward and made a spreading gesture. Finally, the sign for sky, his hand sweeping across above his head. Mother went to sky. His first sentence, not spoken but signed, pulled from the vocabulary of his grief and shaped into meaning. Eli stared at his younger brother, then repeated the signs, adding one more at the end, the sign for love. Arms crossed over his chest. Mother went to sky. Love. Caleb pulled both boys against him, his own eyes wet. Amelia sat back, watching this family find its voice in silence. She thought of her own mother, who had never learned to sign, who had loved her daughter fiercely but could never quite bridge the gap between them. Here, in this ranch house still heavy with loss, that gap was closing. Later, after the boys had gone to bed, Caleb and Amelia sat by the dying fire. He practiced signing the alphabet, she corrected gently. When he finally managed the entire sequence without error, she applauded in her silent way. He wrote on the slate, "Boone will be back." She nodded, wrote, "We will be ready." He studied her face in the firelight. This woman who'd arrived in a torn wedding dress and was rebuilding his family with patient hands and picture cards. Why? He signed one of the first signs she'd taught them, the hand shaking back and forth like a question. She considered, then wrote slowly, "Because broken things can be remade. Because silence doesn't mean emptiness. Because your boys have words inside them that need to come out, even if they never make a sound." As if to prove her point, they heard footsteps on the stairs. Jonah appeared in his nightshirt, Eli behind him. "Pa," Jonah whispered, then signed "Bad Dream." Caleb opened his arms, and both boys climbed into his lap, too big for it, but needing the closeness. Amelia rose to leave them to their moment, but Eli caught her sleeve. He signed carefully, "Stay, family." So she sat back down, and they stayed that way as the fire died to embers. A father, two boys, and a teacher who was becoming something more. Outside, the Texas night stretched endless, full of threats like Boone and promises like tomorrow's lessons. But inside, in the circle of lamplight, hands moved in the ancient rhythm of language, building words from air, meaning from motion, and hope from the ruins of grief. The trunk sat in the upstairs hallway like a coffin, unopened since Sarah's death. Amelia found it while searching for extra blankets, its brass corners tarnished, leather straps brittle with age. Caleb stood in the doorway as she knelt beside it, his face unreadable. "Those are Sarah's things," he said unnecessarily, then wrote it down when he remembered. Amelia's hands hesitated on the latch. She wrote, "The boys need proper clothes for the harvest dance. May I?" The harvest celebration was Red Hollow's biggest social event, when the community gathered to celebrate surviving another year of drought, wind, and isolation. Caleb hadn't attended since Sarah died, but this year felt different. This year, they had something to prove. Inside the trunk, Sarah's life lay folded in tissue paper. Gingham dresses in blue and brown, a green silk saved for special occasions, petticoats with hand-tatted lace. Beneath the women's clothing were smaller items, a boy's jacket and knee pants, stored away for when Eli grows into them. They would fit him now. Caleb realized with a start. 2 years had passed while he wasn't watching. Amelia lifted each piece with reverence, checking seams and hems. The green silk would need taking in. Sarah had been fuller figured, but the gingham would work with minor alterations. She set up Sarah's Singer sewing machine, its treadle squeaking from disuse, and began her work. The boys watched from the doorway as she transformed their mother's dresses into something new yet respectful of what they'd been. She kept the essential lines but added practical touches, deeper pockets, reinforced seams, a hem that wouldn't drag in ranch dirt. When she held up the altered blue gingham against herself, Jonah signed pretty. For the boys, she performed more dramatic surgery on Caleb's old suits. Eli's pants were hemmed and taken in. The jacket sleeves shortened but kept long enough for growing room. For Jonah, she created knee pants from a pair of Caleb's worn trousers and fashioned a small vest from an old waistcoat. When she presented their outfits, both boys fingered the fabric with wonder. "We look like town boys," Eli said, then signed it for good measure. The morning of the dance, the entire household buzzed with nervous energy. Caleb trimmed his beard and applied pomade to his unruly hair, the sweet smell filling the washroom. The boys submitted to vigorous scrubbing, their faces shining pink when Amelia finished with them. She braided her own hair in a coronet, pinning it with Sarah's tortoiseshell combs that Caleb had silently placed on her dresser. The ride to town took an hour, the wagon wheels creating dust clouds that followed them like ghosts. As they approached Red Hollow, they could hear the fiddle and accordion already warming up, the sound carrying across the prairie like an invitation and a warning combined. The town hall had been transformed. Corn stalks flanked the entrance, tied with red ribbon. Chinese paper lanterns hung from wires stretched between buildings, their colors muted in the afternoon sun but promising magic come nightfall. Tables groaned under the weight of harvest offerings. Apple pies, corn pudding, pickled vegetables in mason jars, smoked meats arranged on platters. They were early, but not first. Women from the quilting circle had already claimed a corner, their voices dropping to whispers as the Morgan family entered. Amelia felt their eyes like needles, taking in every detail of her altered dress, her position beside Caleb, the way the boys flanked her protectively. "That's the deaf woman," someone whispered, not quietly enough. "Living in sin under that poor Sarah's roof," another added. "Those motherless boys, exposed to Lord knows what." Caleb's jaw tightened, but Amelia touched his arm lightly. She'd faced worse at the school for the deaf, where hearing parents often treated the teachers like curiosities or corrupting influences. She signed to the boys, heads high, "We belong here." As the hall filled, the whispers grew louder. Some faces showed curiosity, others disapproval, a few outright hostility. The boys pressed closer to Amelia, their newfound confidence wavering. Then a woman approached, tall, severe-looking, with steel-gray hair pulled back so tightly it stretched her features. Mrs. Clara Hutchins, the schoolmarm, commanded respect through sheer force of will. "Mrs. Hart," she said formally, then caught herself. "Miss Hart, forgive me. I heard about your situation." Caleb stepped forward protectively, but Mrs. Hutchins raised a hand. "I'm not here to judge. I wanted to tell you that my sister Martha was deaf. Born that way. My parents sent her away to an institution. Said it was for the best." Her voice cracked slightly. "I haven't seen her in 20 years. Don't even know if she's still alive." She looked directly at Amelia, speaking slowly and clearly so she could read her lips. "What you're doing for these boys, teaching them to speak with their hands. It's remarkable. Martha tried to teach me once, but I was too proud, too foolish to learn." Amelia pulled out her small notebook, wrote quickly, "It's never too late to learn." Mrs. Hutchins read it, blinked hard, then nodded. "Perhaps you're right." She glanced at the quilting circle corner, where disapproval radiated like heat. "Don't mind them. Half of them have secrets that would curl your hair if you knew." As the sun set and the lanterns were lit, the hall transformed into something magical. The fiddle struck up a reel, and couples began forming for the dance. Children ran between the adults' legs, playing tag and sneaking cookies from the dessert table. For a moment, it seemed like the Morgan family might blend into the celebration unnoticed. Then Silas Boone arrived. He entered like a man who expected applause, his wife and 3 daughters trailing behind him in matching yellow dresses. His voice boomed across the hall, greeting everyone with excessive friendliness, working the room like a politician. when his circuit brought him to the Morgan family. He stopped with theatrical surprise. Well, well, Morgan, you decided to join civilization tonight. His voice carried intentionally, drawing attention. And you brought your household. He turned to Amelia, speaking loudly and slowly as if she were simple. Are you enjoying the party? Amelia maintained her composure, but Eli stepped forward, his hands moving sharply. She's deaf, not stupid. Several people nearby gasped not at what Eli said, but at the fact that he'd said it at all. The boy who hadn't spoken in 2 years was defending his teacher with fierce hand gestures that needed no translation. Boone's face reddened. Boy needs to learn respect, he said to Caleb. But I suppose that's what happens when you let an unqualified woman of questionable morals teach children. The music stopped. Everyone in the hall turned to watch. Now, I'm a Christian man, Boone continued, his voice filling the silence. I believe in charity, but there are limits. This woman abandoned at the altar, obviously defective, now living unmarried with a widower. What kind of example is that for our community? Judge Cornelius Wade, who'd been sampling the apple cider, set down his cup with deliberate precision. The sound echoed in the quiet hall. He was known for his fairness and his habit of observing everything while saying little. Now he pulled out a small leather notebook and began writing. Mr. Boone, the judge said mildly, are you making a formal complaint? Boone, emboldened by what he saw as support, puffed up. I'm simply concerned about the moral welfare of our community. This woman has no teaching credentials, no references, no husband. She could be teaching those boys anything with her hand waving. Witchcraft, for all we know. A small voice piped up from beside the dessert table. It's not witchcraft. It's talking. Everyone turned to see a little girl, maybe 7 years old, her hands covered in pie filling. It was Margaret, Widow Catherine's daughter. The widow herself stood nearby, her weathered face unreadable. She taught me how to say friend, Margaret continued, and made the sign 2 index fingers hooked together. See, it's like holding hands with your fingers. She ran over to Amelia and repeated the sign, beaming. Amelia smiled and returned it, their fingers linking in the gesture of friendship. Widow Catherine stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd survived too much to fear judgment. My husband died at Antietam, she said quietly. Left me with 3 children and a farm I could barely manage. You know who helped me, Sarah Morgan. And when she died, I was too wrapped in my own troubles to help Caleb with his boys. She looked at Boone with undisguised contempt. Seems to me this woman is doing what the rest of us should have done, helping a family heal. If that's immoral, then morality isn't worth spit. Here, Mrs. Hutchins added. I've seen those boys in town this past week. First time they've smiled since their mother passed. That's not corruption, that's resurrection. Boone's face had gone from red to purple. You're all being fooled by what? Judge Wade interrupted. By a woman teaching children to communicate, by boys learning to express themselves after tragedy, by a family recovering from loss. He made another note in his book. Mr. Boone, I've been documenting your various concerns about your neighbor's properties for some time now. This seems to be part of a pattern. The tide was turning. People began murmuring, some defending Amelia, others simply questioning Boone's motives. But Jonah provided the final word. The 9-year-old stepped into the center of the circle that had formed, his small body trembling but determined. He faced the crowd and began to sign, Eli translating in a clear voice. Miss Amelia taught us to say what's in our hearts. We couldn't talk after Mama died. The words got stuck, but now we can say things with our hands. He paused, then continued, his signs becoming more confident. She's not our mother, but she's our teacher, and she's our friend, and that's good. Then, to everyone's amazement, Jonah smiled a real, full smile that transformed his thin face. It had been exactly 2 years since anyone had seen that smile. Several women dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The fiddle player, an old man named Cornelius who'd seen enough of life to know grace when he witnessed it, struck up a slow waltz. "Enough talk," he called out. "This is a dance, ain't it?" Couples began forming again, the tension dissolving into movement. A few brave souls approached Amelia, speaking slowly and asking through gestures if she'd teach them some signs. The boys demonstrated eagerly, showing off their new vocabulary. But Boone wasn't finished. As he stormed out with his family in tow, he passed close to Caleb. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You think you've won something tonight? I've got papers. Legal papers. That creek water is mine, and soon your ranch will be too." Caleb watched him go, then felt a touch on his arm. Amelia stood beside him, the Chinese lanterns casting colored shadows across her face. She signed something he'd recently learned: "Together, we are stronger." Around them, the harvest dance continued. The fiddle sang its ancient songs of love and loss, of seasons turning and life continuing despite all hardships. Margaret and several other children surrounded Jonah and Eli, begging to learn more signs. Mrs. Hutchins engaged Amelia in a careful conversation about pedagogy, writing questions in her notebook. Judge Wade approached Caleb as the evening wound down. "Morgan, you might want to prepare your documentation for those water rights. Boone's been buying up claims all over the county. But from what I've seen tonight, you've got something he doesn't: community support. That matters in a court of law." As they loaded into the wagon for the journey home, the boys were exhausted but exhilarated. They signed rapidly to each other, recounting the evening's victories. Amelia sat beside Caleb on the driver's bench, her altered dress rustling in the night breeze. "Thank you," Caleb said aloud, forgetting again that she couldn't hear, but she understood. Nodding and signing back, "Family protects family." The moon rose full over the prairie as they headed home, and for the first time in 2 years, the Morgan family wagon carried the sound of laughter, Jonah's high giggle, Eli's deeper chuckle, even Caleb's rusty laugh joining in. Amelia couldn't hear it, but she felt it in the vibrations through the wagon bed, saw it in the way their bodies relaxed against each other, knew it in the ease that had replaced the rigid tension of grief. Behind them, Red Hollow settled into sleep, but the conversations continued in various homes. The deaf woman, the motherless boys, the way they'd stood together against Boone's attack, the miracle of Jonah's smile. Change had come to their small community, arriving not with violence or drama, but with the quiet revolution of hands speaking what voices couldn't say. Sheriff Hollis arrived at dawn, his horse's hooves breaking the frost on the grass. Caleb met him at the door, already dressed for the day's work, though his hand stilled on his coffee cup when he saw the official papers in the sheriff's hand. "Caleb," Hollis said, his weathered face uncomfortable, "I'm here on official business. Gotta deliver these." The papers bore the seal of the county court, red wax pressed with the eagle of authority. Caleb broke the seal and read, his face darkening with each line. "Complaint regarding moral irregularity and potential corruption of minors." The heading declared in bold script. "Tom," Caleb said quietly, using the sheriff's given name, "you know this is horseshit. What I know and what the law says are different things." Hollis shifted his weight, leather gun belt creaking. "Boone's filed formal papers. Says you're living in sin with that woman, exposing your boys to improper influences. He's demanding an investigation." From the kitchen doorway, Amelia watched. She couldn't hear the words, but she could read the threat in the sheriff's posture, the anger in Caleb's clenched jaw. She approached slowly, and Caleb handed her the papers. Her eyes scanned the legal language: unwed woman of questionable reputation, unnatural communication methods, potential witchcraft or foreign influence. Each phrase was carefully chosen to paint her as a danger, a corruption to be removed. Sheriff Hollis addressed her directly, speaking slowly so she could read his lips. Miss, I've got to ask, do you have any papers, teaching certificates, references? Amelia nodded, went to her room, and returned with a leather portfolio. Inside were her graduation certificate from the American School for the Deaf, a letter of recommendation from the headmaster, and her teaching credentials from Hartford. She also pulled out something else, a daguerreotype of herself in a wedding dress, standing beside a tall man whose face had been scratched out with something sharp. "That's your intended?" Hollis asked gently. She nodded, then wrote on her slate, "Thomas Garrett. We were to be married June 15th. He left me at the church, said he couldn't bear a defective wife." The sheriff read it, his face softening. "And you came west alone." She wrote, "Had nowhere else to go. Saw Mr. Morgan at the station. Saw his boy's pain. Understood silence." Hollis handed back the papers. "These are good, but Boone's got influence. He's been buying up judges along with land." He turned to Caleb. "You've got 2 weeks to respond to the complaint. After that, there'll be a hearing, if it goes badly." He glanced at the boys, who had crept to the top of the stairs to listen. "The court could remove them from your custody." After the sheriff left, the house felt brittle, like spun glass ready to shatter. The boys signed rapidly to each other, fear evident in their gestures. Caleb sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands. Amelia began preparing breakfast, but her movements were mechanical, distracted. That night, the household retired early, exhausted from the weight of Boone's threats. But in the small hours before dawn, a scream pierced the silence, not a voiced scream, but the raw, guttural sound of terror from someone who rarely made any sound at all. Caleb burst from his room to find Amelia's door open, lamplight spilling into the hallway. She sat on the floor, her white nightgown tangled around her, clutching the wedding dress she'd been altering. Her eyes were wide, unseeing, trapped in whatever nightmare had seized her. The boys appeared in the doorway, frightened. Caleb knelt beside Amelia, unsure how to comfort someone who couldn't hear soothing words. He touched her shoulder gently, and she jerked away, then seemed to return to herself. Tears streamed down her face. She signed frantically, too fast for Caleb to follow. Eli understood some of it. Church, alone, everyone watching, laughing. Caleb lit more lamps, bringing light to chase away the shadows. He made coffee the universal remedy for night terrors on the frontier. When they'd all gathered around the kitchen table, Amelia had composed herself enough to write her story. "I stood at the altar for an hour. Everyone in Hartford society was there. Thomas's mother had opposed the match from the start, said I would produce defective children. But Thomas had sworn he loved me despite my deafness. That morning, his mother convinced him otherwise. He never came. The minister finally told everyone to go home. I stood there in this dress," she gestured to the garment, "until the church was empty. Then I packed one bag and bought a train ticket west, anywhere west, away from the whispers and the pity." She looked at the boys, these children who understood loss. She wrote more. "Your mother was lucky. She was loved until the end. Some of us are abandoned while we still breathe." Jonah moved first, wrapping his thin arms around Amelia's waist. Eli followed. And suddenly she was crying again, but differently, the clean tears of shared sorrow rather than isolated pain. Caleb watched his boys comfort this woman who'd brought them back to life, and something shifted in his chest. He'd hired a teacher, but somewhere between that first sign language lesson and this moment, she'd become something else entirely. When the boys finally returned to bed, Caleb and Amelia remained at the table. The cavalry insignia on the shelf caught the lamplight, his medal from Antietam, where he'd learned that survival and living were two different things. He began to sign, slowly, having to fingerspell many words. I was at Antietam, September 17th, 1862. Bloodiest single day in the war. I was 19. His hands shook slightly as he continued. Saw things, did things, came home broken. Sarah put me back together, gave me boys to live for. When she died, I broke again. Worse this time. He pulled out a small bottle from a drawer, morphine. The label faded, but still readable. Started needing this to sleep, to forget. Threw it away the day you arrived. Haven't needed it since. Amelia took the bottle, examined it, then signed, "We are all broken in different ways." From upstairs, Eli's voice drifted down, "Pa, Miss Amelia." They climbed the stairs to find both boys sitting on Eli's bed, a worn Bible between them. Sarah's mourning jewelry, a brooch containing a lock of her mother's hair, lay on the quilt. "I need to tell you something," Eli said, his voice cracking. He looked at Amelia, then signed as he spoke so she could understand. "The night Mama died, I was with her. Pa was getting the doctor. Jonah was asleep." His hands trembled as he continued. "She could barely breathe. But she grabbed my hand. She said, 'Take care of them.' I thought she meant Pa and Jonah. But now I think maybe she meant whoever came next, too. Maybe she knew we'd need someone." Jonah signed rapidly. "Mama would like Miss Amelia. Mama liked people who helped." Caleb pulled both boys close. "Your mama was the wisest woman I knew. If she trusted you to take care of us, then we need to trust her wisdom." He turned to Amelia, and his hands formed words with an intensity that needed no translation. "Stay. Please. Stay." The sign was simple, a hand pressed down, holding something in place, but the emotion behind it was complex. Not just remain here, but become permanent. Be family. Choose us as we choose you. Amelia's response was equally simple and profound. She signed, "Home." They sat there in the lamplight, a father, two boys, and a woman who'd arrived in a torn wedding dress, and made their decision. They would fight Boone, but not with violence. They would use the law, use the truth, use the community that had begun to support them. Caleb retrieved paper and pen. "We'll need to document everything. Water rights going back 15 years, Sarah's father's original claim, maps, surveys, tax records." Amelia wrote, "And character witnesses, Mrs. Hutchins, Widow Catherine, Judge Wade." Eli added, "We can show them our lessons, how much we've learned." Jonah signed, "I'll smile for the judge. That will prove Miss Amelia helps us." It was a small army of evidence they planned to marshal, but it felt like enough. As they finally prepared to return to bed, Caleb noticed the family Bible still open on Eli's bed. Sarah had kept meticulous records, their births, deaths, marriages. The last entry was her death date in Caleb's shaky hand. Amelia picked up the pen, dipped it in ink, and looked at Caleb questioningly. He nodded. Below Sarah's death date, she wrote October 3rd, 1882. Amelia Hart became teacher and friend to the Morgan family. Eli read it, then took the pen from her. In his careful boy's script, he added, "And part of our family." The Bible would never be presented as evidence in court. It was too private, too sacred. But that entry, witnessed by lamplight and sealed with tears that had finally stopped being only about grief, marked the moment when four broken people became one mended whole. Outside, a coyote howled at the setting moon, and somewhere in the distance, Silas Boone was probably planning his next attack. But inside the Morgan house, something stronger than legal writs was forming. They'd found their own language, part sign, part speech, part touch, all love. When Amelia finally returned to her room, she folded the wedding dress carefully and placed it in the bottom of her trunk. She would keep it not as a reminder of abandonment, but as material for whatever new life needed stitching. The dress that had marked an ending in Hartford would help create a beginning in Texas. Caleb made a final entry in his journal. October 3rd, 1882. We have decided to fight, not with fists or guns, but with truth and law. Amelia has become essential to us. I signed stay tonight, and she signed home. The boys call her family. I'm beginning to understand what that means. God help me. Sarah, but I think you would approve. Your boys are healing. We all are. The lamp burned low as the house settled into sleep. Each person in their own bed, but somehow closer than they'd ever been. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More threats from Boone, the complex work of building a legal defense. But tonight, they were simply a family that had chosen each other, speaking in signs and silence, building something permanent from the pieces of their separate ruins. The notes began appearing at dawn, slipped under the door like poison seeping through cracks. The first one Caleb found was written in block letters on brown butcher paper. "The deaf woman is cursed. Protect your children." He burned it before the boys could see. But Amelia had already found another tucked into the schoolhouse window. "Unnatural woman teaching unnatural ways." Within a week, they were everywhere, tied to the gateposts, wedged into the wagon wheels, even pinned to the washing on the line. Each message grew more vicious. Witch, Jezebel, child corrupter. The handwriting varied. Boone had recruited others to his cause, or perhaps the poison had spread on its own, fear breeding fear in the small community. Amelia collected them all in a box, refusing to let them disappear. When Caleb tried to take them away, she wrote firmly, "Evidence. They condemned themselves with their own words." The mercantile in Red Hollow became a trial by whispers. When Caleb sent the boys for supplies, Mrs. Henderson, who'd always saved peppermint sticks for them, now served them in cold silence. Other customers moved away as if the boys carried contagion. Only Edgar Mills, manning the postal counter, offered them kindness, slipping extra stamps into their purchase with a sympathetic nod. It was at school where the cruelty cut deepest. Caleb had decided the boys should attend regular classes twice a week, to show they weren't being isolated or corrupted. But on their second visit, they returned with Eli's shirt torn and Jonah's eye swelling purple. They wouldn't explain at first, signing rapidly to each other when Caleb demanded answers. But when Amelia knelt before them with her medicine box, the story emerged through Eli's angry signs and halting words. "The Boone girls started it," he said, while Amelia dabbed carbolic acid on his split lip. "Said Miss Amelia was teaching us devil signs. Said we were going to be cursed like her." Jonah's hands moved painfully, his knuckles were scraped raw. "I hit Timothy Boone. He said bad things about Miss Amelia, things I won't repeat." Amelia's hands were gentle as she rapped Jonah's knuckles, but her eyes blazed with controlled fury. She signed to them, "You defended me." Both boys nodded. Then, in perfect unison, their hands moved. "She is our mother now." The sign for mother, the thumb of an open hand against the chin, followed by the emphatic gesture for now, not replacing Sarah, but claiming Amelia as theirs in the present, in this new configuration of family. Amelia's eyes filled with tears she wouldn't let fall. She signed back, "And you are my boys, my brave, foolish boys." She then taught them a new sign, her hands moving with deliberate precision, courage. It was similar to the sign for strong, but with a lifting motion, like something rising despite weight pressing down. "This," she signed, "is what we have. Not fists, not cruel words. Courage." Caleb had been watching from the doorway, his own hands clenched with the desire to ride to the Boone Ranch and deliver the kind of justice the frontier used to know. But Amelia caught his eye, shook her head slightly. They would not become what their enemies accused them of being. That evening, as they practiced their legal arguments, Caleb had been writing letters to lawyers in Fort Bryer. Seeking representation, a rider approached through the dusk. Sheriff Hollis again, his face even more grim than before. This time, the papers he carried were thicker, more official. The seal wasn't just from the county court, but from the territorial authority. Caleb read them by lamplight, his face draining of color. "Foreclosure notice," he said quietly. "Boone's claiming I've defaulted on water rights fees. Says I owe 5 years of back payments for illegal usage of creek water. The amount listed was impossible more than the ranch made in 2 years. It was clearly fabricated, but it bore official stamps, signatures, the weight of law twisted to serve greed. You've got 10 days to pay or vacate," Hollis said miserably. "Caleb, I've been sheriff here 15 years. I've never seen such manipulation of the law, but my hands are tied. These papers are legal, even if the claim ain't just..." After Hollis left, They sat around the table in stunned silence. Even the boys understood that this was different from the previous threats. This was the law itself turned against them. And how did you fight the law with the law? Amelia wrote quickly, "We need to see the creek. Tonight." They saddled horses, Amelia riding Sarah's gentle mare, the boys sharing their father's backup mount. The moon was 3/4 full, providing enough light to navigate the familiar paths. The creek ran along the eastern boundary of Morganland, fed by mountain snowmelt, the lifeblood of the ranch, or it should have been running. When they reached the usual crossing, they found only a trickle, the banks dry and cracked where water should have been flowing. Caleb dismounted, walked upstream, then cursed the first profanity the boys had ever heard from him. "He damned it," Caleb said. "That bastard dammed the creek upstream, on his land, diverted it away from us." The evidence was clear in the moonlight, fresh tool marks on the rocks. A new channel cut through Boone's property, stealing the water that had flowed this way since before white men claimed these lands. It was brilliant in its evil: create the problem, then offer to solve it by taking the land. They were examining the diversion when they heard horses approaching. Caleb pushed the boys and Amelia behind a boulder, his hand going to the rifle on his saddle. But the rider who appeared wasn't Boone or his men. It was Edgar Mills, the station master and postman, leading a pack mule loaded with canvas sacks. "Figured I'd find you here," Edgar said, dismounting with difficulty. His arthritis made riding painful. But he'd come anyway. "Been doing some investigating of my own." And he opened one of the sacks, revealing a treasure trove of documents, telegraph records, shipping manifests, correspondence. "Been collecting these for months," he said. "Every time Boone sent a telegram, I kept a copy. Every letter to judges, lawyers, land speculators, I made notes." He pulled out a specific sheet, holding it up to the moonlight. "This here's from 3 months ago. Boone writing to a judge in Austin, promising him a cut of Morgan Creek Ranch once he acquires it. And this one, another paper, is him ordering the materials to dam the creek, dated 2 weeks before he filed the water rights complaint." Caleb read through the documents, his expression shifting from despair to hope. "Edgar, this proves everything. But why? Why risk yourself for us?" The old man looked at Amelia, who was reading the papers Caleb had finished. "My daughter was born deaf," he said quietly, "back in Ohio, before I came west. My wife insisted we send her to an institution, said it was for the best. I was young, stupid. Let it happen." His voice cracked. "She died there. Pneumonia, they said. But I know better. Died of loneliness, of being thrown away." He cleared his throat, continued. "When I saw Miss Amelia at that station, standing there in that torn dress but with her chin up, dignity intact, and then saw how she brought your boys back to life, I knew I had a chance to do right, to make up for failing my own girl." Amelia set down the papers and signed something to Edgar. He didn't understand the signs, but he understood when she pressed his weathered hand between both of hers, gratitude too deep for words, spoken or signed. They spent the next hours planning. The documents needed to be organized, copied, prepared for presentation. They would need to travel to Fort Bryer, where the territorial court sat, beyond Boone's influenced local judges. It would be dangerous. Boone wouldn't let them leave easily once he learned their intent. As they rode back to the ranch, Jonah fell asleep in the saddle, and Caleb had to hold him steady. Eli rode beside Amelia, and in the moonlight, she taught him the sign for justice, 2 hands balancing like scales, then coming together in resolution. Back at the house, they worked through the night. Amelia's neat handwriting filled page after page, creating an index of Edgar's evidence. Caleb wrote letters to every honest lawyer he'd heard of, pleading for representation. The boys, exhausted but determined to help, practiced their testimony how they would show the judge their education, their healing, their love for their teacher who had become their mother. As dawn broke, painting the sky the color of hope and blood mixed together, they had assembled their case. boxes of evidence, letters of support from Mrs. Hutchins and widow Catherine that Edgar had secretly collected, documentation going back to Sarah's father's original land claim. But they also knew that Boone would learn of their plans soon. The mercantile ledgers Edgar had copied showed Boone had men watching the roads, reporting on the Morgan family's movements. They would have one chance to reach Fort Bryer with their evidence intact. Amelia wrote a final note as the others dozed at the table, exhausted. "We are not just fighting for water or land. We are fighting for the right to be a family that doesn't look like others expect. We are fighting for the principle that love and healing matter more than convention. We are fighting to prove that different doesn't mean wrong." She looked at Caleb, asleep with his head on his arms, at the boys curled together on the floor like puppies, at Edgar snoring in Sarah's old rocking chair. This unlikely collection of wounded souls had become an army of sorts, not armed with guns, but with truth, evidence, and the fierce love that grows between people who choose each other despite the world's objections. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, nature reflecting the battle to come. But inside, in the circle of lamplight, a family forged by choice rather than blood prepared for the fight of their lives. They had been pushed to their darkest point, threatened with losing everything. But in signing, "She is our mother now," the boys had declared something that no legal document could dissolve. They belonged to each other, and they would stand together against whatever came. The eviction notice lay on the table, its official seals gleaming in the morning light. 10 days to save their home. 10 days to prove that justice could prevail over manipulation. 10 days to show that a deaf woman and 2 grieving boys and a broken father could build something worth protecting. Caleb woke, saw Amelia watching the sunrise through the window. He moved beside her, and together they stood guard over their sleeping children, his by birth, hers by choice, theirs by love. Whatever happened in Fort Bryer, they had already won something precious. They had found their way from silence to expression, from isolation to unity, from 3 separate griefs to one shared strength. The sun rose fully, burning away the morning mist, revealing the ranch in sharp detail, every fence post, every building, every tree Sarah had planted and Amelia had helped tend. This was home, and they would fight for it with every legal weapon they could marshal, every truth they could document, every word they could sign or speak. The battle for Morgan Creek Ranch was about to begin in earnest, but the battle for their family that had already been won. The convoy to Fort Bryer assembled before dawn like a small army preparing for battle. 3 wagons, the Morgans' buckboard leading, followed by Widow Catherine's covered wagon carrying Mrs. Hutchins and 3 other families, and Edgar Mills bringing up the rear with boxes of evidence packed in mail sacks. The morning mist clung to the ground as they set out, wheels creaking in the silence. Boone's men watched from the ridgeline, but didn't interfere. Too many witnesses now, too public a procession. Let them reach Fort Bryer. Boone had probably calculated. His influence extended to the territorial court as well. The courthouse in Fort Bryer rose from the prairie like a limestone monument to civilization's attempt to impose order on chaos. 3 stories tall, with Greek columns that seemed absurd against the endless Texas sky. It represented law and justice in their most formal incarnation. The brass spittoons flanking the entrance gleamed in the morning sun, recently polished for the circuit judge's arrival. Judge Cornelius Wade had traveled from Austin specifically for this case. Edgar's telegrams to higher authorities had ensured that local judges couldn't bury the matter. Wade was known for 3 things: his fairness, his intelligence, and his intolerance for legal manipulation. He was also, though few knew this, fluent in 3 languages, having served as a translator during the Mexican War. The courtroom filled quickly. Word had spread through 3 counties about the case of the deaf woman, the widower, and the land baron who wanted to steal water rights. The gallery divided naturally Boone's supporters and hired men on one side, the Morgan family's allies on the other, and in the middle, the curious and undecided. Amelia sat at the defendant's table beside Caleb, wearing Sarah's green silk dress that she'd altered to fit. The boys flanked them, dressed in their best clothes, hands folded but ready to sign. Behind them sat their witnesses, Widow Catherine stern-faced and determined, Mrs. Hutchins with her teacher's bearing, Edgar Mills guarding his boxes of evidence, and surprisingly, 6 other families who'd traveled through the night to testify. Boone entered like a man attending his coronation, his lawyer a slick-haired man from Dallas named Pritchard carrying leather-bound law books that he placed dramatically on the plaintiff's table. Boone's wife and daughters sat in the front row, their yellow dresses matching like a statement of unity and prosperity. "All rise," the bailiff called, and Judge Wade entered, his black robes sweeping behind him. He was younger than expected, perhaps 40, with penetrating eyes that took in every detail of the divided courtroom. "Be seated," Wade said, then addressed the court. "We're here to adjudicate multiple complaints, water rights, foreclosure proceedings, and questions of moral fitness regarding the guardianship of minor children. Mr. Pritchard, as plaintiff's counsel, you may begin." Pritchard stood, his voice oily with false concern. "Your Honor, we're here about the safety and moral welfare of 2 innocent boys, exposed daily to a woman of questionable character and dangerous foreign influences." He gestured toward Amelia. "This woman, abandoned at the altar, and we must ask why has insinuated herself into the Morgan household without proper credentials or character references. She teaches these children unnatural hand signals that could be anything witchcraft, foreign propaganda, moral corruption. She cannot even speak properly to defend herself." The crowd murmured. Pritchard continued, warming to his theme. "Furthermore, she lives unmarried with a widower, creating an environment of moral ambiguity. The children, already traumatized by their mother's death, are now exposed to impropriety and confusion. My client, Mr. Boone, as a concerned neighbor and Christian man, felt compelled to act." He pulled out documents. "Additionally, Mr. Morgan has failed to pay legitimate water rights fees, accumulated over 5 years. The creek in question runs through Mr. Boone's property first, giving him primary claim. We ask the court to grant foreclosure and to remove the children from this inappropriate environment." Pritchard sat, satisfied with his opening salvo. Judge Wade made notes, his expression unreadable. Defense. The Morgans had no lawyer, none would take their case against Boone's influence. Caleb stood, his voice steady despite his lack of legal training. "Your Honor, we'd like to present evidence and witnesses that will show Mr. Boone's claims are not only false, but part of a pattern of intimidation and fraud." Wade nodded. "Proceed." Edgar Mills took the stand first, the witness Bible heavy in his arthritic hands. The court stenographer, a thin man with quick fingers, prepared his equipment. "State your name and occupation," Wade instructed. "Edgar Mills, station master and postal clerk for Red Hollow." "What evidence do you bring before this court?" Edgar opened his first box. "Telegraph records, Your Honor. Every message Mr. Boone sent regarding the Morgan Ranch." He pulled out a specific paper. "This one, dated August 10th, 3 months ago, is to Judge Patterson in Austin, promising him 20% of Morgan Creek Ranch once acquired." Gasps from the gallery. Boone's face reddened. Edgar continued methodically, presenting telegram after telegram, showing Boone's systematic plan to acquire not just the Morgan Ranch, but 6 other properties through similar tactics. The court stenographer's pen flew across the pages, recording every damning word. Mrs. Hutchins testified next, her teacher's voice carrying clearly. "I've observed Miss Hart's teaching methods extensively. They're based on the French system developed by Laurent Clerc and Thomas Gallaudet, recognized throughout the civilized world. She's not teaching witchcraft, she's teaching language to children who'd lost their ability to communicate." "Can you demonstrate?" Wade asked. Mrs. Hutchins stood and signed slowly. "Good morning, Your Honor." Then she translated. "I've been learning from Miss Hart. My sister was deaf, sent away to die in an institution. Miss Hart is giving these boys what my sister never had, a voice." Widow Catherine took the stand with the authority of someone who'd survived too much to fear any man. "My husband died at Antietam," she said simply. "Left me with 3 children and a dying farm. Sarah Morgan helped me survive. When she died, them boys went silent as graves. Miss Hart brought them back to life. If that's corruption, Then the Bible's got it backward. The 6 other families testified in succession, each telling the same story. Boone had diverted their water, filed false claims, tried to force them to sell. The Hendersons, who'd run the mercantile for 20 years. The Smiths, whose farm bordered Boone's expanding empire. The Martinez family, who'd held their land grant since Texas was Mexico. Each testimony built the pattern of systematic theft disguised as law. Then Amelia stood. She couldn't speak her defense, but she'd written it in her finest hand. She gave the pages to Caleb, who read in his clear, steady voice. Your Honor, I came to Red Hollow in a torn wedding dress, abandoned and alone. I am deaf, this is true. But deafness is not a moral failing or a sign of God's disfavor. It is simply a different way of existing in the world. I have taught the Morgan boys to speak with their hands because their voices were trapped by grief. In teaching them, I've given them back their ability to express love, sorrow, hope, and joy. If this is corruption, then every teacher who helps a child find their voice is corrupt. Caleb's voice grew stronger as he read, I have lived in the Morgan household with complete propriety, as their employee and teacher, that I have come to love these boys as my own, that they have come to call me mother. This is not impropriety, but the miracle of hearts healing together. I ask the court to see what truly matters here, not the form of family, but its function, not the appearance of propriety, but the reality of love and care. Judge Wade leaned forward. The boys, can they demonstrate their education? Eli and Jonah stood together, moving to the center of the courtroom. Eli spoke first, his voice clear. Your Honor, we'd like to show you what we've learned. They began with the alphabet, their hands moving in perfect synchronization through each letter, then numbers, mathematical problems solved in sign and spoken aloud. They recited in both sign and speech passages from the Bible, from McGuffey's Reader, from the Constitution of the United States. But then Eli did something unexpected. He stepped toward Judge Wade and signed slowly, carefully. Your Honor, do you understand me? Wade shook his head, and Eli began to teach him, right there in the courtroom. This is truth, his hand moving from his mouth forward. This is justice, hands balancing like scales. This is family, the fingers of both hands interlocking. The judge repeated each sign, his judicial dignity temporarily set aside as he learned from a 12-year-old boy. The courtroom watched in fascination as the highest legal authority in the region took instruction from a child. Finally, Eli signed something complex, then translated, I said, thank you for listening with your eyes and your heart, not just your ears. Jonah stepped forward then, the 9-year-old's voice small but determined. Your Honor, I didn't speak for 2 years after Mama died, not one word. Miss Amelia taught me to talk with my hands first, and then my voice came back. Watch. He turned to Amelia and signed rapidly, his face animated with joy. She signed back, and they had a brief conversation that needed no translation, the love and trust between them evident in every gesture. I told her I was scared, Jonah said to the judge. She told me courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right anyway. Boone's lawyer tried to object, but Wade silenced him with a gesture. The judge had pulled out paper and was sketching the signs the boys had taught him, studying them with scholarly interest. Mr. Boone, Wade said suddenly, you claim the creek water rights. Show me your original deed. Boone produced a document, clearly newly forged though made to look old. Wade examined it, then called Edgar back. Mr. Mills, your evidence includes the original survey maps. Edgar produced them authenticated, stamped, dated 1847. They showed clearly that the creek had always run through Morgan land, that Boone's property ended 50 yards from the water. Interesting, Wade said dryly. Mr. Boone, your deed is dated 1845, yet it references landmarks that didn't exist until the railroad came through in 1871. Curious temporal anomaly, wouldn't you say? The courtroom erupted. Boone's supporters fell silent while the Morgan supporters murmured excitedly. The court stenographer struggled to keep up with events. Wade gavelled for silence. Furthermore, I have here. He pulled out his own documents, Reports from Austin about similar schemes in 3 other counties, all bearing your name. Mr. Boone, it seems you've made a career of stealing water and land through false documentation. He stood, his robes billowing. This court finds in favor of the defendants on all counts. The water rights belong to Morgan Creek Ranch, as they have since 1847. All foreclosure proceedings are vacated. Furthermore, Mr. Boone, you are fined $5,000 for fraud and attempted theft. You will also remove your illegal dam within 7 days or face criminal charges. The gavel came down with finality, but Wade wasn't finished. As to the matter of Miss Hart's fitness to teach and reside with the Morgan family, this court finds that she has brought nothing but education, healing, and appropriate maternal care to these children. The fact that she is deaf is irrelevant to her moral character or teaching ability. The fact that she is unmarried simply means she was available to help a family in desperate need. He looked directly at Boone. What is immoral, sir, is using the law as a weapon against the vulnerable. What is corrupt is stealing water from your neighbors, then charging them for it. What is inappropriate is spreading poisonous rumors about a woman whose only crime was being different. Wade turned to the Morgans. This family formed by tragedy, sustained by courage, and united by choice rather than blood represents the best of what Texas can be. This court stands in defense of their right to exist as they choose, to heal as they must, and to define family in whatever way brings them peace. The courtroom exploded in celebration and outrage equally. Boone stormed out, his family trailing behind. Pritchard gathering his useless law books. The Morgan supporters surrounded them, offering congratulations. Several families approached Amelia, asking through gestures if she would teach their children too. But in the center of the chaos, the Morgan family stood in a tight circle. Amelia signed to the boys, "We won." Eli signed back, "No, we're family. We already won before we came here." Judge Wade approached them before leaving, his hands moving carefully in the signs Eli had taught him: truth, justice, family. Then he spoke to Caleb. "Mr. Morgan, you have a remarkable family. Guard them well. And Miss Hart," he turned to Amelia, speaking slowly so she could read his lips, "thank you for reminding this court that justice isn't about conformity, but about protecting the right of good people to live as they choose." As they loaded into the wagons for the journey home, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of victory and vindication. The brass spittoons at the courthouse entrance caught the light like symbols of a system that, this once at least, had worked as intended. The ride home was filled with exhausted joy. The boys fell asleep leaning against Amelia, their hands still shaping signs in their dreams. Caleb drove in peaceful silence, occasionally glancing back at this woman who'd entered their lives in a torn wedding dress and had sewn them all back together with threads of language and love. Justice had been served. The ranch was safe. But more importantly, their right to be a family unconventional, multilingual, bound by choice and not convention had been affirmed by law. The news reached Red Hollow before they did. Edgar Mills had sent telegrams from Fort Bryer, and by the time the convoy of wagons rolled down Main Street, half the town had gathered. Not the hostile crowd they'd left behind, but people wearing expressions of curiosity, respect, and in some cases, shame. Mrs. Henderson stood outside the mercantile, twisting her apron in her weathered hands. As the Morgan wagon passed, she called out, "Caleb, Miss Hart, hi. I owe you an apology. We all do." The wagon stopped. Amelia couldn't hear the words, but she read the remorse in the woman's posture. She signed to Caleb, "Forgiveness makes us lighter." He translated, and Mrs. Henderson's eyes filled with tears. "I have a nephew," she said quietly. "Born simple-minded. They said, sent away to an asylum. But maybe he just needed different teaching, like your boys." Others approached, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. The minister, Reverend Blake, who'd remained silent during Boone's campaign of rumor, now stepped forward. "Miss Hart, I'd like to learn your hand language for my sermons, so everyone can hear God's word, even those who can't hear." By the time they reached Morgan Creek Ranch, the sun was setting, painting the land gold and crimson. The house stood exactly as they'd left it, but somehow it looked different, more solid, more permanent, more like home. The boys jumped from the wagon before it fully stopped, running toward the door with energy that had been absent for 2 years. "We're home," Jonah shouted, then signed it for emphasis, his hands spreading wide to encompass the house, the land, the very air itself. Spring came early that year, as if nature itself wanted to celebrate their victory. By late March, wildflowers carpeted the pasture's bluebonnets, Indian paintbrush, prairie roses. The creek, freed from Boone's Dam, ran full and clear, its sound a constant reminder of justice served. The Morgan Ranch had never looked more alive. The schoolhouse that had stood empty became the center of unexpected activity. Mrs. Hutchins, true to her word, had organized sign language classes. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, families arrived from across the county. Farmers' wives, cowhands, even some of Boone's former supporters came to learn this new language of hands and heart. Amelia stood at the slate board, teaching patiently. She'd created an entire curriculum, beginning signs, intermediate conversations, even specialized vocabulary for ranch work. Eli and Jonah served as assistant instructors, their young faces serious with responsibility as they corrected hand positions and demonstrated proper movements. "Learning this is like learning to see with your heart," Mrs. Hutchins told the class one evening. "My sister Martha tried to teach me 20 years ago, and I was too proud to learn. Don't make my mistake. Some of the most important things in life are said without sound." The transformation in the community was remarkable. Children who'd once taunted the Morgan boys now signed greetings on the street. The minister incorporated basic signs into his sermons, making them accessible to a deaf traveling preacher who'd started attending. Even crusty old Herman, the blacksmith, learned to sign good morning and thank you, his massive hands surprisingly graceful. One evening in early April, Caleb found himself building something he hadn't planned, a ramp to the schoolhouse door. Old Mr. Jeffries had wanted to attend classes, but his wheelchair couldn't manage the steps. "Times are changing," Jeffries said, watching Caleb work. "Maybe changing for the better. That woman of yours, she's teaching us more than hand signs. She's teaching us to see each other." "She's not my woman," Caleb said automatically, then stopped, hammer suspended mid-swing. The words felt wrong, incomplete. Amelia had become so essential to their lives that defining what she wasn't seemed impossible. That night, after the boys were asleep, Caleb found Amelia in the garden Sarah had planted, tending the roses that were just beginning to bud. Moonlight caught in her hair, and her hands moved gently among the thorns, never getting scratched, as if she and the roses had an understanding. He approached slowly, his heart pounding like a youth's. From his pocket, he pulled a small velvet box, worn at the corners. Inside was Sarah's wedding ring, a simple gold band with a single small diamond. Nothing fancy but honest and true. Amelia saw him coming, saw the box, and her hands stilled on the roses. She waited, watching his face in the moonlight. Caleb's hands shook as he signed, having practiced this for days. Sarah is gone. She will always be the boy's mother, always be part of us. But you brought us back to life. You gave us language when we had no words. You became mother to my boys, and he had to fingerspell the next part, having no sign adequate for the feeling everything to me. He opened the box, the ring catching moonlight like captured starfire. Then, in signs and spoken words mixed together, "Will you complete us? Will you marry me, not to replace what was, but to build what can be?" Amelia's eyes filled with tears that turned silver in the moonlight. Her hands moved slowly, precisely. "I came here in a dress meant for one wedding and found a life I never expected. Yes. Yes to you. Yes to the boys. Yes to this family we've built from broken pieces." When she took the ring, her hands were steady. It fit perfectly, as if Sarah herself had approved this continuation of the family's story. They stood in the garden, surrounded by roses about to bloom, and kissed for the first time soft, tentative, then deeper, full of promise. "Ew," came a voice from the window, followed by giggling. The boys had been watching, probably for who knows how long, but their faces were bright with joy, not jealousy or resentment. "Does this mean Miss Amelia will be our real mother now?" Jonah called down. "She already is." Eli answered before the adults could respond. "Now it's just official." The wedding was set for May, when the wildflowers would be at their peak and the weather perfect for an outdoor ceremony. The entire county threw itself into preparations with enthusiasm that seemed partly celebration, partly atonement for their earlier suspicions. Mrs. Bow Henderson donated bolts of white silk from her store. "For a proper wedding dress," she said firmly. "One that won't be torn." Widow Catherine organized the food, recruiting every skilled cook in 3 counties. Mrs. Hutchins arranged for a photographer from Fort Bryer. This family needs new pictures for their walls. Even Edgar Mills contributed, ordering special items from San Antonio white candles, ribbon, a guest book with gilt edges. "Every detail matters," he said. "This wedding is about more than 2 people. It's about a community choosing to be better." The morning of the wedding dawned perfect clear sky, gentle breeze. The meadow behind the ranch house transformed into nature's cathedral. Wooden benches borrowed from 3 churches created an aisle. Wildflowers tied to each row. A simple arch of woven branches stood at the front, decorated with roses from Sarah's garden. Amelia emerged from the house in her new dress, simpler than the one she'd worn in Hartford, but more beautiful for being chosen rather than expected. The boys walked beside her, one on each side, their hands holding hers. They would give her away. They'd decided, because she was already theirs to give. The entire population of Red Hollow had come, plus families from neighboring towns who'd heard about the deaf woman who'd taught a community to speak with their hands. They stood as she approached, and then, in a moment, no one had planned. They began to sign clumsily, imperfectly, but with sincere effort, beautiful. "Welcome, family." Reverend Blake performed the ceremony, speaking each word clearly while Mrs. Hutchins signed for those who needed it. When he asked who gave this woman, both boys spoke and signed simultaneously. "We do, with our whole hearts." Caleb's vows were simple. "You entered our lives in a moment of mutual loss and transformed it into mutual gain. You taught us that silence can be full, that different doesn't mean less, that families are built on choice as much as chance. I promise to love you, to stand with you, to speak with my hands when words fail, and to build with you a life that honors both what was and what will be." Amelia signed her vows while Mrs. Hutchins voiced them. "You saw me standing abandoned and offered me purpose. Your boys gave me the motherhood I thought I'd never have. You gave me a love I'd stopped believing in. I promise to cherish the memory of Sarah while building our own future, to mother these boys with all my heart, and to create with you a home where all forms of communication signed, spoken, or simply felt are valid and valued." When Reverend Blake pronounced them married, the cheer that went up could probably be heard in Fort Bryer. The boys hugged Amelia so hard they nearly knocked her over, then included Caleb in the embrace until all 4 stood wrapped together, a family sealed by law and love equally. The celebration lasted until evening. Tables groaned under food. Children ran wild through the wildflowers, and impromptu sign language lessons broke out everywhere. At one point, Amelia found herself teaching a group of ranchers' wives the sign for gossip, fingers fluttering at the mouth like escaping words, and their laughter rang across the meadow. But the moment that everyone would remember, the moment that defined the day, came when Jonah approached Amelia with a mischievous glint in his eye. He signed something elaborate, a joke he'd been practicing with Eli for days. Why did the cowboy's horse learn sign language? Because it was tired of being saddled with misunderstanding. It was terrible, a groaning pun that worked only in sign, requiring visual wordplay that spoken English couldn't capture. But Amelia laughed, not her usual silent shoulder-shaking laugh, but a real sound, rusty from disuse but genuine, bubbling up from deep inside. And then Jonah laughed too, his first real laugh in 2 years. high and bright and infectious. The laughter spread like wildfire. Eli joined in, then Caleb, then the entire gathering, until the meadow rang with joy. Some laughed at the joke, some at the pure pleasure of hearing Jonah laugh again, some at the absurdity and beauty of this moment, a deaf woman and a hearing boy sharing a visual pun that had broken through 2 years of grief. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, the newlyweds and their boys stood at the door of their home, waving goodbye to the last guests. The photographer had captured them earlier formal, posed, proper. But the real picture was this 4 people who'd found each other across silence and sorrow, standing together as evening brought its gentle darkness. Inside, they sat for their first dinner as an official family. The table that had once hosted silent. Mechanical meals now buzzed with conversation, some spoken, some signed. All understood. Caleb had prepared Sarah's pot roast recipe. Amelia had made fresh bread. The boys had picked wildflowers for the centerpiece. As they settled into their seats, Jonah raised his hands. "We should say grace," he announced, "but our way." They joined hands around the table, and together, in perfect synchronization, they signed their gratitude, not just the traditional words, but their own additions. Thanks for second chances, for voices found in silence, for mothers both remembered and present, for fathers who chose courage over custom, for boys who taught adults to see beyond hearing, for communities that could learn and change, for love that came wearing unexpected faces. The lamplight cast their shadows on the wall, 4 figures become one family, their hands moving in harmony, creating something beautiful from the space between sound and silence. Outside, the Texas night stretched infinite, full of challenges and changes yet to come. But inside, in the golden circle of home, the Morgan family, newly configured, hard-won, chosen and cherished, began the rest of their lives together. Through the window, Sarah's roses bloomed in the garden, their petals catching moonlight like blessings made visible, like promises kept and renewed, like love that transcends loss and makes all things new. 5 years later, the Morgan Creek Ranch schoolhouse overflowed with students learning to sign. Amelia, now heavily pregnant with her first biological child, watched Eli teach advanced signs to newcomers while Jonah, 14 and confident, translated sermons at Sunday service. The community that once whispered cursed now celebrated difference as strength. The transformation began with 1 abandoned woman and 2 silent boys. But it grew into something larger, a testament to how families form not from perfection, but from the courage to reach across isolation. Caleb often told visitors, "We learned that gratitude isn't about having what you expected, but recognizing the gift in what arrives unexpected." Sarah's portrait still hung in the parlor, now joined by wedding photographs and drawings the boys made of hands forming words. They'd learned that honoring the past didn't mean being imprisoned by it, that new love didn't erase old love but built upon its foundation. The Morgan family proved that sometimes the greatest injustices, abandonment, judgment, loss, become doorways to unexpected grace. Their story whispered across Texas family isn't about blood or convention, but about choosing to stay, to learn, to transform silence into language and strangers into beloved. Have you ever been judged as defective or unsuitable like Amelia was at that train station, only to later prove your worth